Navigating CAM expenses. Office, shopping center, and some multi-tenant industrial leases require the tenant to, in addition to paying a base rent or minimum rent, pay the tenant's share of the project's expenses that are also referred to as common area maintenance expenses or CAMs or triple net charges. The amount of CAMs can sometimes be quite large and be a significant part of the tenant's overall occupancy costs and also part of the landlord's income. The CAMs are typically determined by multiplying the tenant's share of the project by the amount of the project's operating expenses. Percentage that is the tenant's share is very important, and so is the definition of pool of expenses which make up the project's operating expenses. Tenant's share of operating expenses is usually based on the relative size of the premises that's leased by the tenant to the overall size of the project. Having an accurate measurement of the premises and of the project is the starting point in making sure the tenant's share is fair and accurate. To do so, the parties should measure the premises and the overall size of the project. If this measurement can't be done before the parties sign the lease, then the parties should agree in the lease to do the measurements afterwards and adjust the tenant's share based on the results of those measurements at a later date. In retail leases of large regional shopping centers, the leases often exclude the area of the anchor tenants from the size of the shopping center for the purpose of determining tenant share of the CAMs, which means the satellite tenants will pay for the anchor's share of the CAMs. The other number that determines how much the tenant pays for CAMs is the actual amount of the operating expenses. The lease usually has a very long list of expenses that will be charged as part of the operating expenses to the tenant, ranging from real estate taxes to insurance, including earthquake insurance, to capital expenses, and on. The typical approach is to throw everything and the kitchen sink in the definition of operating expenses. The parties can take different approaches to negotiating this aspect of the lease. One approach would be to negotiate on a line item by line item basis of what is included or excluded from operating expenses. This is a very time-consuming process. It's expensive for the tenant and the landlord, and ultimately the tenant is not sure when it gets a bill whether it is in fact only being charged for the items that were agreed upon. A second approach is to simply put a cap on how much CAMs the tenant will pay. A third approach is just to agree to a stipulated amount for CAMs, which is being adopted by more large shopping center landlords. That last approach helps streamline the lease negotiations, and it helps the tenant understand its total occupancy expenses. The final step is to make sure that the tenant has a right to audit the operating expenses. The law in California doesn't provide an implied right to audit the landlord's books and records. The right to audit the landlord's books and records must be negotiated and incorporated in the lease for the tenant's protection.